Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Debbie Olive, Senior Vice President, Europe for CooperVision. Debbie's had a number of decades worth of experience within the international FMCG and contact lens arena. She's worked with high-profile retailers previously and FMCG brands such as Kraft Jacobs, Suchard, William Grant & Sons, and Marks & Spencer's. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Thank you, Leila. It's great to be with you.
Thanks so much for joining me. And you've had a fantastic background, right? Diverse mix of industries and experience. And I wonder, for those that perhaps don't know you as well as I do, whether you could give us a little brief synopsis into how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, I think like many people, you leave university, you're not quite sure what to do. And I met some really fascinating people at part of a recruitment fair. And I knew that FMCG would be the place for me at that point in time. And I went through a variety of different firms such as Kraft and Quaker Oats, and then into the drinks industry. And the learning experience during that time was huge, as it is for most graduates, where you may change and become more uncomfortable in your career to go through different areas, such as, for me, it was purchasing, it was marketing and sales. And some of the breadth of that experience was really important too. I then moved on later in my career to the contact lens industry, where I am now. And some of that actually came about through almost by accident, in that I was working for Marks & Spencer at the time with a couple of kids under 5 and a very large commute, which I'm sure many people will relate to. And I decided to set up my own business, which I soon found out that is not for me. I like working with other people. I like working with teams. And then I started a temporary role within contact lenses, another player in the industry. And I found myself staying there for the longer term. So yeah, that's how I've come to be where I am today.
That's a great story, and thanks so much for sharing. And talk to me a little bit about the current work that you're doing, because obviously this has been a time of difficulty for many, what with COVID and obviously what's happening in the press at the moment. It would be great to learn a little bit more about the current state of play.
Yeah, of course, like pretty much everybody out there, we've been hit by COVID, maybe not as extreme as other industries. However, we know it's really impacted our retailers all across Europe and particularly the UK at the moment. So we're really doing what we can to support them and also our wearers to make sure they can still get their contact lenses. Other than that, we always try to work with our opticians to get more people into contact lenses at any age. And they can be really life-changing for wearers. And that might sound like an overstatement, but it's something that we hear time and time again, that it actually can change people's outlook on life, their personality, and so on. And aligned with that, we've recently launched a new lens called MySight, and it's a lens specifically for short-sighted children. It's incredibly exciting and different because it not only corrects their prescription, but it can also slow down the progression of their short-sightedness, so it's not as strong a prescription in the future. And that has massive long-term health benefits for the children in later life.
That is absolutely fantastic. And I'd never heard of that before. That is brilliant. As a contact wearer myself for many, many years, when you talk there about the fact that, I mean, eyesight is I think easy to take for granted until you realise that perhaps it is diminishing. So I absolutely concur with what you have said there. And I remember, as I'm sure you hear many of these stories from your wearers and from those who are talking to you about sight when they find out more about what you do, is they're telling you stories about their life and how it changed. I remember being really, really young and starting to not being able to see very well and wearing glasses. And the moment the glasses went and the contact lenses, I mean, it took a little while to get used to the contact lenses, but after that, it was brilliant because I hated wearing glasses when I was young. But I'm sure that's probably a story that you hear from many people, isn't it?
Yeah, and even, I wasn't lucky enough to wear contact lenses in my teens, but I was one of the children who put their spectacles in their bag on the way to school so my mother wouldn't catch me. So there's a number of these. Now, things have changed since I was at school and there are much more fashionable spectacles, but having that choice available at any age is great, and it just gives you a little bit more freedom as well as some of the more emotional benefits.
Mhm. I think the emotional benefits there that you mentioned is absolutely key. And when you look below the surface, I actually think, not only are there wider benefits as you mentioned, but also can have a significant impact on confidence and certainly potentially mental health there as well. As with I'm sure many youngsters or even those who are adult now, always very self-conscious. When I was younger, and I think we all are naturally, we all are, relatively self-conscious of how we look and feel and come across. And, something as life-changing as sight and being able to see makes a massive difference to potentially mental health. I mean, I suffer from mental health, depression, anxiety, have done for many, many years. And actually, I don't know what I do in a way without being able to properly see. I think it's so important, especially in the role that I do when I'm speaking with people all the time. You want to make sure you can actually see and understand and see body expressions and not have, the concern that you can't fully embrace what people are saying, or maybe even what they're not saying through body language or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's lovely to be able to work in an industry where people feel really good about the products they're working on. And, it's so lovely. Every time I meet an optician, every single one of them has got a story about how they feel like they've changed somebody's life through contact lenses. And sometimes we do, sort of video interviews with our wearers. And sometimes it feels very life changing, and other times it's just, I remember one very memorable 20-something male who said, I never quite knew who I was talking to in a club before, but now I do. Life-changing sometimes in different ways.
Very good. And so, Debbie, I know in addition to your role, you're obviously looking after Europe more broadly. You also sit on the Global Inclusion Council, which is fantastic. And I understand that was set up earlier this year. As a diversity and inclusion and belonging advocate yourself, it would be brilliant to learn a little bit more about what you're doing and how the tone has been set ultimately, because it is critical that we have buy-in from the top to make sure initiatives and D&I is filtered throughout the length and breadth of the organisation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think without the tone from the top, these things can fail very, very quickly. And it was fantastic that our CEO, Al White, really set that tone earlier this year and effectively declared that inclusion and diversity were really core to the future success of our company. Now, CooperVision already has a few extremely clear values that are so core to our business and the heart of our business, and they include things like partners, and they've even have friendly in there, which you don't find in many company values. And we have to link all of our standard values to these values of inclusion, particularly in the environment we're in today, meaning that different experiences and perspectives can come together and make us more competitive. Ultimately, this is great for the people, but it always has to be great for the company too. It helps everybody reach their full potential. It helps you in a time when talent is there's a war on talent everywhere, but also because it's the right thing to do. And as a company, we've only really just started out on this journey and driving some of this thinking. But however, we have to start with, whilst we talk about diversity, and that's key, we have to start with the inclusion part. Until you get people with a real sense of belonging, you can't make diversity work as easily as it could. So for me, we do surveys, we ask questions about, do people feel they can be themselves at work? And there are loads of studies out there, which I'm sure you've seen, that say companies are much more effective for that. So as well as the surveys, and we've been using pulse surveys as well to track our progress against it, we are really looking to start with the leaders of the organization and helping them understand their own perspectives, their own unconscious biases potentially, and make sure then it's really embedded into every single part of the people agenda across the company, whether it's at recruitment level, which I guess is the obvious place, but even at performance conversations. I read something recently which says that women are much less likely to get more detailed and deeper feedback for fear of upsetting us or something along those lines. And that's really key if we're going to develop our equally our talent across the organization. So policies are key, and for instance, at CooperVision in the UK, we've really pushed recently a lot of family-friendly policies, and they were super important to me when I had kids. In fact, I moved companies as a result of that, and finding the right sort of company that shared my values. And so one could say that having some of those family-friendly policies helped attract and retain people that they wouldn't have ordinarily got. So I keep that as an example in my mind when I think about CooperVision and any other company as well.
I absolutely concur. And what I love is that you've talked about a number of pieces, which I would describe as kind of the intersectional link between all of these different facets of diversity and inclusion. So absolutely, not only is it incredibly important to have representation, and it's wonderful that you're spearheading this change, because I'm sure many women and men and other individuals in the organisation do look up to you as a, role model. I love the word real model, because I think it is about being real and it is about being human, and clearly you have that in abundance. But it is important, as you say there, that we aren't necessarily just soloing out gender diversity, because there's so many different facets of visible diversity, from BAME, from gender, disability, through to those which are very invisible diversities. And in the context of talking about contacts, I should say, and vision, there are many invisible diversities, as I'm sure you know, including parenthood, which I think absolutely, not only is it just about mothers, it's about fathers, it's about the equality when it comes to looking at parental responsibilities, or it could be an individual who is single and has caring responsibilities for elderly parents. These invisible diversities we wouldn't know until we scratch below the surface and we actually find out more about those individuals. And we touched on mental health earlier, which I'm very pleased we did, because I'm terribly passionate about mental health and well-being, and I think that forms a big part. Our well-being, we feel far more well and happy, and therefore more likely, I'm sure, to work harder if we know our responsibilities at home are being able are being looked after. And so whilst I think still to this day there are many organizations or many leaders, when I'm sitting in boardrooms talking to leaders who go, oh, diversity and inclusion, must be the chief people officer that you need to speak to, or it must be the head of D&I. Actually, D&I relates to every single individual in many of those different diverse facets that we talk about, and you mentioned there, including parenthood, which I absolutely concur is absolutely key within that D&I and B spectrum. And
I think sometimes it's about, we can start with big statements as a company. We then need to show the action that we're taking and the processes and policies that we're changing to underpin those. But most importantly, really, is the people attitude change that you need to start seeing over time. And so, as I said, that belonging piece for me really summarizes it beautifully. So, and sometimes, I had a conversation with a white male middle-aged colleague of mine who should be top of the tree in theory on this, but he was expressing at times where he didn't feel like he belonged. So this is important to everybody, whether, whatever your background, whatever stereotypes we put against things. Belonging is the way that we really create a great culture in an organization and allow it to drive forward and be a place that we all want to spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day in, and feel really happy to be there.
I couldn't have put it better. I am I wrote a book called Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging, which I must send you a copy actually, because you're so passionate about belonging. But in it, I talk about the fact that every single human on the planet has a intrinsic need to feel that they belong. And you mentioned there you had left organizations because perhaps the culture wasn't right. And I hear this a lot from leaders. They've left because, I mean, the words for the mission, the vision, whatever, could be great, but if they don't truly harness or feel that they are welcome in the organization and they have good relationships and there's a good culture, it is, it's not right for them, and they move on. And so I absolutely concur. I think belonging, it goes to the absolute heart of us as human beings. When you strip back everything else, we all want to feel like we belong and we are able to make that difference. And it's a great example that you shared there with your colleague who's a middle-aged white guy. Everyone can feel it. You could be a middle-aged white guy in a board full of middle-aged white guys, and hey, you might not feel that you belong because of the culture or because of the background of others being different. I think it is, it starts with listening, and it starts with that understanding where you are open enough to be able to listen to how others feel, because and bring some emotion into the boardroom as well. I remember back in the day being in many boardrooms and people were like, it's not business, it's personal. And I'd always be like, that's a weird expression. It's not business, it's personal. Why isn't it personal? Because it's all about, as you said right at the beginning of this conversation, it is about relationships. It's about relationships. People stay in organizations because they love their boss. They stay in organizations because they love the people they work with. They love the culture. They feel like it's a family inside. And if they don't feel that, engagement plummets. And we all know then what happens as a result.
Yeah, and one of the things that really attracted me to my current company was the way they came about. They dealt with their values. So the values, unlike potentially previous companies I'd worked for, were not pieces of paper stuck on a wall somewhere. They were very much driven by what was true in the organization. So actually, the way that the values came about was by a company survey about why are we different? What do we stand for? And we asked all employees, we asked our customers and suppliers and so on, and asked, why are we different to other companies you work with, or potentially competitors, or maybe other places you've worked? And the 4 values that came up as part of that were actually just reflective of what people said. So I knew it was true rather than words on a PowerPoint deck, let's say.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about diversity and inclusion and belonging here. And I wonder, what does diversity and inclusion and belonging mean to you personally? If we're to maybe think back at your fantastic career and where you are now, easy perhaps for others looking in to think, must have been easy to get to that role. I don't think it's always easy, especially for women, not just for women. I make that point.
Yeah.
This could affect anyone, but I wonder whether you could share a little about your thoughts on D&I and perhaps the personal journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we talked about belonging, and it's super important if we're going to attract and retain the diversity of people that we want. And to me personally, I have such a strong thread running through me that people should be able to achieve whatever their background, whether that's race or gender or sexuality or whatever. And one of the strange memories I've got growing up in the 70s as a child was that I had a book, possibly it may have been from the 60s or 50s even, but I remembered this book so distinctly that it explained the 6 jobs that women could do. And they were nurse, secretary, teacher, air hostess, and so on. So very stereotypical roles. And I remember being quite confused or even aggrieved at the age of 8 that I wasn't sure which one of those 6 jobs I could do and I wanted to do. And I was pretty cross that my brother had a broader choice, so I didn't really understand the implications. And actually, I didn't have a mother who, who went through A levels or degree or so on, and from a family perspective, nobody had been to university in my area. So that competition, strangely, between my brother and I really helped both of us. And we were the first in the family to go to university, and we're sort of somewhere between best friends and adversaries even still. And that's really stayed with me. So it's so important that we really show children and particularly teenagers how to reach their aspirations and give them role models and give them support and help them understand choices and that they can make. So, one of the charities I've done a little work in is Inspire the Future, and that really looks again at particularly at teenage girls, but how they can make their aspirations a reality, or just to give them something to aim towards, because many people don't have the number of role models potentially that they could. So if there's any way of playing some of that role, then that would make me super happy. I've also, more on a work basis, I've recently been running a series of workshops for female managers within the organisation, and none of them were new managers, and they were pretty competent women. But what really struck me is when I asked a question at the beginning of that session about what's the one thing that holds you back? What struck me was it was almost 3/4 of that highly competent bunch of women suffered from some level of low confidence or imposter syndrome, or were scared at raising their voice, or they're scared of raising their point in a meeting, even when they knew they were correct. And we really need to support them in order, first of all, to see more women at senior levels, but secondly, just to do the right thing by them and our business. We're not harnessing their potential or their abilities if we're not hearing them in the right way.
Absolutely. And I love that you've taken upon it yourself to go down the route of taking action. This is just great. Absolutely great to hear. And I mean, I heard a very worrying statistic the other day. And, I don't know whether you can perhaps relate to this, but 30% of those, those who are in a minority, whether it be women, whether it be ethnic minorities, whomever it might be, spend 30% of their energy and time trying to fit in. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, 30%. Imagine if you channeled that into productivity. And what you said there is actually very reflective. And it is, and not singling out purely women here, but women in particular do suffer from confidence and imposter syndrome and worrying about how they might perhaps come across and having that confidence. If we could have, as you are doing, some fantastic women who are willing to stand up, who are willing to champion change and to really back and give confidence to those who are aspiring leaders, or those who are younger graduates, or really want to make their way up the corporate career ladder when it comes to getting into those more senior roles. Absolutely critical that there is a arm around the shoulder, that they have got that boost and that injection of confidence. And a big part of that is through role models and real models. And it always saddens me. I had a couple of conversations with some of the work that I do with youth and some charities that I support with youngsters when speaking. It's a great charity called Working Options in Education, and a lot of the kids are from underprivileged backgrounds, and it would break my heart hearing them say, well, I might say, do you want to go into business? How about being a sales director or a whichever director within business? And they would say, well, I don't see anyone who looks or sounds like me who's at that place. And so one must ask, if you can't see it, how can you feel that you can be it? Now, there are always people like yourself, like myself, and other fantastic women who have, that confidence and are knowing that they're going into whatever they might be going into, especially many women who are in STEM as well, I see, who are the first to do it. And, without those women and other diverse and inclusive leaders really pushing the boundaries and being willing to pave the way to then support and send the lift back down for others, we cannot make a sustainable change. So it's wonderful to hear that you're championing women's groups and that you're giving the support to those that are really keen and can make a sustainable difference to our future, because it is all about our future generations of leaders.
Completely. And, I have a 17-year-old daughter who absolutely has a lack of confidence. And so I absolutely think of her, some of her friends, and maybe, and she's had a much more privileged upbringing than many people. So as a result, it's super important, that confidence piece and giving people hope, aspiration and role models, absolutely top of the list.
Absolutely. And before we run out of time for today, Debbie, I'd love to go into the lightning round. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to
Yeah, sure.
answer each of the next questions. It's a bit of fun, so don't worry. And first of all, well, biggest question first, what is your secret to success?
I try not to sweat the small stuff, and I always remember my grandma's favourite phrase. So she always says, "There's always a way, you just haven't found it yet," and that really speaks to my optimism.
Love it. And what about authentic leadership? I know that the term authentic is perhaps a little overused these days, but what is true authentic leadership to you?
Well, I guess if you can go home at night, look yourself in the mirror, and know that you're really striving to lead with integrity and compassion and transparency, and that you're also adequately self-aware enough to know your own derailers. Everybody has them, and really hold out for support on some of those. Trust is the number one thing that's important to me.
Brilliant. And how about any heroes or sheroes, as I like to call them, any books, quotes, shows that you would like to share with our listeners that you feel are inspiring or noteworthy?
Yeah, there are lots of people I admire, and I find people fascinating anyway, but those who can combine excellence in their field with some level of philanthropy, such as sort of Baroness Lane Fox or even Darcy Bustle. And one close to my industry actually is Dame Mary Perkins, the owner of Specsavers. So she has a really significant net worth of about 1.5 billion, but has tried never to forget her roots and still lives in the same modest house that she lived in 30 years ago. She's got incredibly strong family values and does a huge amount for charities, particularly for children, including Kidscape, and her own, which is very relevant to this, called Modern Muse, which helps girls make informed career choices. Book-wise, I love, and many people have read it, I think now, but book-wise, I love Factfulness by Hans Rosling. It shows that the world is often better than we think, and sometimes we bring a different lens to it. And I guess that still appeals to my positive nature.
And I can tell that you're a very positive person, which I love. And I agree. I think absolute inspiration there that you've mentioned. I think it's so inspiring when you hear about leaders who are still very humble and really very true to their roots, and they haven't kind of got bigger than their boots. They remember where they came from. I think it's there's nothing more inspiring than that. And finally, I wonder if you could go back in time and give the young Debbie advice, the young Debbie who was reading the books about what women could be. What advice might you give to your younger self, or indeed anyone who's at the early stages of their career and wondering what they might go off and do and have that confidence?
Don't let anybody or anything constrain you, and do something that really makes you happy.
That is brilliant advice. And I think it's a piece of advice that actually everyone can take on board, whoever you are, whatever level you are within organisations. So thank you ever so much, Debbie. It's been fantastic having you on the show. So thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Wonderful to speak to you.
Thanks so much. And by way of my usual summary at the end, lots of learning points. I'm sure the listeners have thoroughly enjoyed the podcast show for today, but some of the real standout pieces for me are very much about taking action and actually the responsibility clear that you demonstrated here, Debbie, when leading the Global Inclusion Council, but also the fact that everyone can make a sustainable difference. It doesn't matter who you are, in which function within the C-suite or the leadership team, but actually taking these meaningful actions, whether it is setting up employee resource groups, whether it is gathering together a group of individuals, could be female, could be ethnic minorities, could be those around mental health, but really giving the opportunity to actually listen and learn from one another, because as Debbie's rightly said, leaders have the responsibility to be able to give back, and role models and real models are so terribly important. So we should collectively stand up and talk about what's important, give voice to those that perhaps don't have the confidence, and really lend our hands as leaders to make a positive and sustainable difference, because more than now, I think ever than before, we must pull together and look at how we can make not only our organizations, but but also wider society, must be inclusive and must really harness the power, of those that perhaps do feel different. So thank you very much indeed again, Debbie. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show, brought to you by Dial Global. You can check out all of the show notes. So if you didn't manage to write everything down, don't worry at all. Everything will be there in the show notes at the end of today's show. Visit www.dialglobal.org/podcast, and we will look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.